Somalia, long plagued by internal strife, is now at the heart of a global power struggle. Once seen only through the lens of conflict and piracy, Somalia's strategic location on the Horn of Africa has made it a prize for world powers. In early 2024, Ethiopia, landlocked and desperate for sea access, struck a deal with Somaliland, a breakaway region unrecognized internationally. Ethiopia was promised a stretch of coastline for a naval base and port, in exchange for hints of recognizing Somaliland's independence. This agreement challenged Somalia's sovereignty and ignited fierce nationalist backlash. President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed's government declared the deal void, vowing to defend Somalia's territorial integrity. The crisis quickly escalated, drawing in regional and global powers eager to shape the outcome. Egypt, Turkey, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia saw both threat and opportunity, while the US, China, and Russia watched closely. Somalia was no longer a distant conflict zone. It had become a central arena for the future of regional security and global trade. The Ethiopia-Somaliland deal was the spark, but the region's volatility had been building for years. Now, the world's eyes are fixed on the Horn of Africa. The Ethiopia-Somaliland port deal shattered regional stability overnight. Somalia's government called it an act of aggression, recalling its ambassador and rallying international support. The move alarmed neighbors. Djibouti feared economic ruin, Eritrea saw a threat to its security, and Sudan worried about wider instability. For Somaliland, the deal was a bold bid for long-sought recognition, but it deepened its rift with Mogadishu. The international community responded with cautious statements supporting Somalia's sovereignty, but behind the scenes, alliances shifted. The African Union, Arab League, EU and US urged dialogue, but the deal forced global powers to take sides. Djibouti and Eritrea braced for economic and security fallout, while Sudan watched nervously. The agreement exposed the region's fault lines, turning a local dispute into a high-stakes contest for influence. The map of the Horn was redrawn, not by borders, but by fear and shifting alliances. What began as a port deal now threatened to ignite a much larger confrontation. The stakes had never been higher for Somalia and its neighbors. The world was on edge. The port deal forced regional powers to pick sides. The UAE, with deep investments in Somaliland's Berbera port, backed the agreement to secure its interests and counter rivals like Turkey. This support emboldened Ethiopia and Somaliland. Despite international condemnation, Somalia turned to Turkey and Egypt for support. Turkey, already a major partner, signed a 10-year defense pact with Somalia, pledging to help defend its coastline. Egypt, locked in a bitter dispute with Ethiopia over the Nile, seized the chance to pressure its rival, sending military aid to Somalia. The conflict now risked becoming a proxy war between Africa's largest militaries. Saudi Arabia, focused on Red Sea security, worked quietly to prevent escalation. Wary of threats to its oil exports and economic projects, the Horn of Africa had become a chessboard for old and new alliances. Every move risked tipping the region into chaos. The stakes were no longer just local, they were global. The world watched as alliances shifted and tensions soared. The crisis in Somalia drew in the world's great powers. The US, balancing ties with both Ethiopia and Egypt, urged restraint but struggled to shape events. China, with vast investments in regional infrastructure, offered to mediate, seeking stability for its Belt and Road Initiative. Russia saw opportunity in the chaos, deepening ties with Ethiopia and Eritrea and eyeing a strategic Red Sea foothold. The EU worried about trade disruptions and a new refugee crisis, calling for diplomacy but lacking decisive influence. Each power played its own game, some seeking stability, others advantage. The Horn of Africa became a new front in global competition. Local disputes now had global consequences. The region's fate was no longer in its own hands. The world's rivalries converged on Somalia's shores. The stakes, security, trade, and the balance of power. The outcome remained dangerously uncertain. As foreign powers maneuvered, Somalia's internal divisions deepened. Al-Shabaab exploited the crisis, recruiting with promises to defend Somali sovereignty. The government, distracted by diplomacy and military posturing, struggled to contain rising violence. Federal member states like Puntland and Jubaland grew more autonomous, wary of Mogadishu's alliances. Clan rivalries flared, manipulated by political elites and outside actors. The fragile balance of power teetered, threatening renewed conflict. State building and economic development stalled as resources shifted to security. The transition to a Somali-led security force was complicated by demands to exclude Ethiopian troops. Somalia's unity was under siege from within and without. The people bore the brunt of these high-stakes games. The nation risked being pulled apart at the seams. For ordinary Somalis, the crisis is a daily struggle for survival. The threat of war looms, promising new waves of violence and displacement. Local economies collapse as trade halts and investment flees. Food insecurity worsens, with millions already on the brink due to drought and climate change. Money pours into weapons, while hospitals and schools go neglected. Social divisions harden, pitting communities against each other. The promise of a better future fades, as hope is replaced by fear. The region's militarization traps people in poverty and uncertainty. The wounds of conflict deepen, lasting long after the headlines fade. The true cost of this power struggle is measured in lives lost and dreams destroyed. For Somalia, the price of geopolitics is heartbreakingly real. By late 2025, the Horn of Africa teeters on the edge of war. Rival militaries crowd the region, raising the risk of a catastrophic miscalculation. Somalia's demand to expel Ethiopian troops from its new security force is a flashpoint. If Ethiopia refuses, direct conflict could erupt. Proxy forces, Egyptian troops, Turkish naval support raise the stakes. A clash could draw in backers and spill across borders, destabilizing the entire region. Vital shipping lanes are at risk, threatening global trade and driving up costs worldwide. The economic fallout would ripple far beyond Africa. Diplomatic efforts continue, but progress is fragile and time is running out. The window for peace is closing. Without compromise, the region faces a war with no winners. The world holds its breath. The Horn of Africa stands at a crossroads, peace or peril. Continued escalation could spark a regional war, shattering Somalia's fragile progress and unleashing a humanitarian disaster. Extremist groups would thrive in the chaos, threatening security far beyond Africa, but conflict is not inevitable. Peace demands bold leadership and real compromise. Ethiopia must renounce the port deal. Somalia and partners should offer a lawful path to sea access. External powers must encourage dialogue, not division. A coordinated international effort led by the African Union could mediate a lasting settlement. The choice belongs to the region's leaders and people: confrontation or cooperation. The world is watching, hoping for wisdom over ambition. The future of Somalia and the region hangs in the balance.